has to beat the Clippers tonight, and he's been struggling since his return in Game 3, shooting just under 32% with only 2 threes. We got to bring in NBA analyst Ric Bucher, but Marcellus, is Chris Paul's legacy on the line tonight?
No, it's not on the line tonight. Hey, look, his legacy is already solidified, and let me tell you why. In success, let's say the Phoenix Suns right now go out there and get in advance past the Clippers and get to the finals, and they beat whoever comes out the East. Hip, hip, hooray. And there was a time, maybe just a couple weeks ago, we were going to give so much of the lion's share of credit to Chris Paul, getting the team over the hump, getting the team into the playoffs, being the court general, his leadership, his acumen, his genius, all of that through osmosis. That's in success. We were going to give that to Chris Paul. But not now, because in failure, if this team goes out there and loses to the Clippers the next 2 games, we're going to look at Chris Paul as like, you're the reason, largely, why they lost to Chris Paul. Lost to the Clippers. Think about this. Chris Paul, in success, would have to share with DeAndre Ayton and, of course, Devin Booker. What in failure, he would sit there and have to take most, if not all, of the blame because of his issues post-COVID. So that's why I don't think his legacy is going to really be affected. Chris Paul would certainly benefit a little bit from the fact that, wow, Chris Paul finally made it to the finals. Wow, Chris Paul won in the finals. But be real, he's not going to be the first person you look at because you're going to say they got to the finals in spite of Chris Paul. All of that adds up to, in success, you're not going to get to be on the medal and be number 1. And in failure, they're going to look at you like, yo, you were the gold for the reason we failed.
I won't say that Chris Paul's legacy is on the line, but I do believe that the growth of his legacy is on the line. We know Chris Paul's floor, but we still are trying to figure out what is Chris Paul's ceiling. Here's the issue with Chris Paul in this game tonight and why the growth of his legacy is on the line. 2015 Western Conference semifinals versus the Rockets. Chris Paul misses 2 games. Chris Paul's team goes on to lose to the Rockets in 7 games. 2016, Chris Paul injures a hand. He misses another 2 games. He goes on to lose in the first round against the Blazers to that team. 2018, what we all know, the Rockets, which Chris Paul is now a part of, they are up 3-2 against the Golden State Warriors. Chris Paul misses 2 games. They go on to lose in 7 games to that Warriors team. The addition of Chris Paul, or rather the omission of Chris Paul, is what cost Chris Paul's team those games. But now the Suns are up 2 games against the Clippers without Chris Paul. Chris Paul comes back, and they're now 1-2 with Chris Paul. So what we realize is this. By omission, Chris Paul's teams have previously lost in the playoffs. Now it appears that by addition, Chris Paul's team may be losing in the playoffs. Either way, it is the fault of Chris Paul that his team would have lost in the playoffs. Previously by omission and most presently by addition. I think that if Chris Paul does take an L tonight and in this series, his legacy at least loses the growth it had to gain.
Did I just hit a time warp? Are we talking about Game 7? Did I miss Game 6? Because nothing can happen in Game 6 that affects Chris Paul's legacy because the series can still be won in Game 7 in Phoenix. And as we know, if he wins the series, regardless of what's happened in the last few games, if he wins the series and they get to the finals, all will be forgotten. We've seen that time and time again. The second reason is that I don't believe that tonight can impact his legacy is that it's already been established. He is one of the best point guards in the last decade.
Right.
He's also one of the best point guards in the last 20 years who is of average size and was not physically dominant enough to get his team to the finals if he indeed ends up losing this series. There's no shame in that. Steve Nash couldn't do it. Derrick Rose couldn't do it. The guys who did, Isaiah Thomas, Russell Westbrook, and Rajon Rondo, they were with very unique special teams and were able to get it done. So I don't look at this series changing his legacy. Yeah. To Acho's point, I do believe that if he gets to the finals, that he can elevate his legacy, that we may look at him in a different way than we do now. But for one reason or another, he has not been physically able, whether it's injury or simply matchups, he hasn't been able to complete the deal. So a very good, excellent, still probably Hall of Fame point guard. But is he in that upper echelon of point guards? No chance. And if he gets to the finals, it still remains to be seen if that would change things. But that's his opportunity if he gets there.
It's tough, man. I just really think it's almost cemented, like wet cement that is drying. Not fully dry yet, but it's certainly close to it. Because in success, the love is going to go to Booker and Ayton because those are the better players on the team. Chris Paul helps in the intangibles, but all the intangibles and contribution went out the door as soon as he came back and affected the team in a negative way. Then we went tangibles. We were like, dude, Chris Paul, your plus minus, we're better without you. We're talking about field goal percentage. The team is better without you. Three-point percentage, the team is better without you. Even at free throw line, the team is better without Chris Paul. So look, when you're talking about in success, they're going to look at those other guys. Then in failure, they're going to look dead at Chris Paul. So that's why I'm like, at 36 years old, Acho can't say, well, we don't know what his floor or ceiling is necessarily, because the dude is a future Hall of Famer who's a great. We're not taking him down from his status of greatness. We're just saying, can you really improve? The only way I can see this improving is that Chris Paul advances, and then Chris Paul takes the leadership role once again and has the production that goes with it, because he's lacking that right now in this moment. And then it's still going to be a shared experience, because is he going to outproduce Booker if they're going to win? Is he going to outproduce Ayton consistently if they're going to win? I just don't see how it adds up.
Yeah, Celis, I'm going to push back on that because there's one guy who was an MVP candidate this regular season. And if they win and they win in a game, if they don't win in game 6, they win in a game 7, they will have earned that home court advantage. And Chris Paul played a big role in that. I can't dismiss what the Phoenix Suns were prior to Chris Paul getting there. I can't dismiss all those intangibles. Yeah, from a statistical standpoint, Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton are carrying the weight. But who has created the opportunity for those statistics to be meaningful? I don't know that DeAndre Ayton and Devin Booker, that their numbers would be significantly different. The difference is that in terms of what they've produced, which is wins and being in the conference finals. And you saw at the very beginning when Chris Paul suffered the shoulder injury, and he suddenly went out, and the Phoenix Suns looked around and said, whoa, wait a minute, where is he? And they fell apart within seconds. That is the intangible. That's the presence of Chris Paul. And the farther you go into the postseason, the more difficult the matchups become. I mean, let's be honest. You see who they've beaten to this point. They've played 3 wounded teams to get where they are. So that's a discount on the entire Phoenix Suns team, not necessarily Chris Paul. But I guarantee you, if they get to the finals, this will not be, oh, Devin Booker did it, DeAndre Ayton did it. The story will be Chris Paul.
Really, for me, Slick, Sell, it just comes down to, if you look at Chris Paul, his legacy, the only thing it's marred by is he gets hurt in the playoffs, not there for his team when his team needs him. It cost his team when he was a part of the Clippers. It cost his team when he was a part of the Rockets. But now Chris Paul gets hurt in the playoffs, and his team looking around like, we actually don't need you. We're better without you. He comes back, and now it costs his team when he shows up. I think you're going to look at Chris Paul, and one, you're going to look at him and say, well, you have the most points in the playoffs without a finals appearance. If they lose tonight, thus end up losing the series. And he's not necessarily in great company when it comes to overall legacies and what we say about the individuals. Carmelo Anthony, a great scorer, but we know he famously hasn't won. Playoff P in headlines right now for being mocked and being criticized too heavily. I think, no, his legacy can't get worse because we already conceded the fact that he may never win a chip. But to get this close and potentially be the reason that his team doesn't win or get to it, the NBA Finals, that could be scarring.
Yeah, see, Chris Paul's never been in this place before. He's never been in this territory before. The injury bug has always caught him at the wrong time. The calendar with the injuries is what always was his shortcoming. Now it's poor performance And look, we can say it was the COVID and coming off of COVID, but that's going to be a minor detail in a greater legacy conversation, because now you're going to come back and say, hey, Chris Paul, you were shooting 51 from the field, 44 from three, and you went out there and closed it 8 straight jumpers, mid-range elbow against Denver. You the one shut that down. You got sick, came back, 32%, 13% from three, shooting 2 for 16 from three, 19 for 60 from the field. And we were undefeated without you. And then you come back and we are not going to advance. Come on, Slick. You know that's going to fall heavily on the shoulders of CP3. Coming up, Charles Barkley does not want to hear stars whine about being criticized. That's right. We'll tell you if we're on Barkley or Paul George's side. That's next, though. Speak for yourself.